Welcome, everybody. I'm Selena Rezvani, and you're joining Women and Work Culture. This is a show really all about those positive habits and practices for boosting women's leadership and helping companies make those bold bets on their female talent. I am so excited to be here today with the Kim Scott, who is a best-selling author and really, a movement maker. Welcome, Kim.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here and to see everybody.
Yeah, we're so happy to have you. And a super warm welcome to our community, too. We're thrilled to have you here week after week learning together. Drop us a note. Tell us where you're joining from in the world, and let us know who's in the house. Kim, let me tell people a little bit about your combo platter of cool experiences you bring. Kim is co-creator of an executive education company, and you don't hear this very often, workplace comedy series based on her best-selling book, Radical Candor. Be a kick-ass boss without losing your humanity. She led teams like AdSense, YouTube, and DoubleClick at Google, and then went to Apple University to teach managing at Apple. What a boss, literally and figuratively. And Kim has been a CEO coach too to companies about like Dropbox, Qualtrics, Twitter, and more. I first came across Radical Candor while I was working on team diversity at Deloitte. And I inhaled it. I loved it, saw so many connections, and I've referenced it about 1,000 times since. So thank you for your work. I see today we have Philadelphia suburbs, Oscar from Mexico, Anne from Minnesota, Mila from Ontario, and Alexis from Pennsylvania. And hello, Sabra Huffman, too. We're so happy to have you all. Hey, community, if you have questions for Kim on getting or giving feedback so you can really contribute your best, please drop them in the notes and send us a comment, and we'll try to get to those. So, Kim, I want to dive right in. For anybody who didn't get to read your fantastic book, Radical Candor, would you tell us a little bit about this concept, where the idea came from?
Sure, absolutely. So radical candor just means care personally and challenge directly at the same time. And it's an idea about sort of how to create cultures of radical candor, how to be a great boss, how to be a great peer, how to be a great employee. So it seems kind of like motherhood and apple pie, caring personally, challenging directly. We know these are the things we're supposed to do. So why radical candor? The reason is that it's rare, and it's rare for two reasons. One, from the time we get our first job, we're 18, 19, 20. We're right at that moment in our lives when our personas are beginning to solidify, but our egos are maximally fragile. And right at that moment, someone comes along and says, be professional. And for a lot of people, we automatically translate that to mean sort of leave your emotions, leave your true identity, leave your humanity, leave everything that's best about you at home and show up at work like some kind of robot. And you can't possibly care personally about others if you're showing up at work like some kind of robot. So you've got to create the kind of environment in which you can build real human relationships at work. And when we're really lucky, we actually love, not in the marriage-destroying HR disaster sense of the word we read so much about today, but we actually love our colleagues. We in the true professional collegial sense of the word. Part of what gives work meaning are the relationships that we form in the office. However, love is not all you need. There's also this challenge directly dimension. And the problem here begins when we're 18 months old. You can put in the chat. If you have a parent who said to you, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all, let me know. At least I did. And most people I know have a parent who said some version of that to them. So the problem here begins when we're 18 months old, like pretty much as soon as we begin to speak. And now it's your job to say it. And I would argue if you really care about your colleagues, it's not just your job, but it's actually your obligation to them as a human being, as someone who cares about them, to say it. So that's sort of what makes it hard. One of the things I've tried to do to make Radical Candor a little bit easier is to give words to what happens when we fail on one dimension or another. So sometimes we remember to challenge directly, but we forget to show that we care personally. And that I call obnoxious aggression.
Yeah.
And radical candor is sometimes mistaken for obnoxious aggression. Sometimes people use the term because it sounds kind of harsh. So if that's happening, call it compassionate candor, right? So it's very different. Radical candor is very different from obnoxious aggression. And very often when we realize that we've been a jerk, when we realize we've fallen into obnoxious aggression, our instinct is, rather than moving the right way on the care personally dimension of radical candor, we go the wrong way on challenge directly. And we pretend like we didn't mean what we said. We offer the false apology, or we sort of indulge in passive aggressive behavior, backstabbing behavior, and that I call manipulative insincerity. And when we think about workplace cultures gone wrong, we like to talk a lot about obnoxious aggression or manipulative insincerity because that's kind of where the drama happens. But the fact of the matter is, the vast majority of people make the vast majority of mistakes when we do remember to show that we care personally. It turns out most people are pretty good people, pretty nice people. Although if you watch TV, you might forget that. But in general, the people who we meet in our day-to-day lives are pretty nice people. But the problem is sometimes we're so concerned about not hurting someone else's feelings or not upsetting them that we fail to tell them something that they'd be better off knowing. And that I call ruinous empathy. So that's what radical candor is and what it's not. Does that help?
Oh, it helps so much. And I think striving for that healthy tension, that happy balance between caring personally and challenging directly is such a good North Star for all of us in doing this.
Yeah.
I want to share with you a great question that came in from Alexis. And she asked, is there a difference that you see around gender when it comes to either giving or getting feedback? Would you say more about that?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we'll talk in a minute about Just Work, my next book. And basically, radical candor works for everyone, but it's much easier for white men to put it into practice than for anyone else. So that's the topic of the next book. But let's just walk through that, how gender plays out in that radical candor framework I just talked to you about. So I think one of the gender dynamics that I see over and over and over again is that if you're a woman and your boss is a man, which happens a lot, then your boss is likely less comfortable giving you feedback than your male peers. And not because he's a misogynist jerk trying to derail your career or anything like that, but because he's been taught since he was a child to be gentler with women. And so I was talking to somebody who led diversity and inclusion at Citibank, and he said, and he saw the following happen over and over and over again. An investment banker, a senior banker, would go to a meeting with a client with an analyst. And in week one, the analyst was a man, and the man made a mistake. The analyst made a mistake. And after the meeting, the senior banker told the analyst in no uncertain terms about the mistake he had made, and he didn't repeat that mistake. Maybe it hurt a little bit in the moment, but it didn't happen again. Next week, same senior banker goes to a similar meeting with a client. This time the analyst is a woman. Woman makes the same mistake the male analyst made the week before. The man did the week before. But this time the senior banker doesn't tell her. And so she makes it again. And it hurts her in her career. Shelley Carell has at has done a lot of research about how lack of feedback really hurts women in their careers. And Claude Steele, who wrote Whistling Vivaldi, has written a lot about how one of the most important things that leaders can do to help underrepresented people, whether it's along racial or gender or both dimensions, whether there's issues of intersectionality, one of the best things that a leader can do is to offer real actionable feedback. And yet, because the leader has kind of a stereotype threat of their own, they often don't deliver the feedback that these people, we as underrepresented people need. And so it's it can feel like a catch-22. So if you are a woman, you really need to work on dragging feedback out of your, and you can't make it safe for them to it's tempting to think that if you make it safe, then they'll tell you. You really have to embrace the discomfort. You have to keep insisting on getting that feedback. So I talk in the book a lot about things you can do, like think very specifically about the questions you can ask, but also reward the feedback when you get it. People are taking a risk to give you feedback. You need to reward it richly. So that's one dynamic. Now there's another dynamic, which is very often when a woman is radically candid with the people around her, both men and women, then it's really, she's likely to be unjustly accused of obnoxious aggression. Only she's not going to be called obnoxiously aggressive. She's going to be called abrasive or bossy or bitchy or whatever. And this is painful, unlikable. This is really painful. And it is tempting when you get that kind of feedback to back off your challenge directly dimension. But if you do that, you will not be effective as a leader. You will not become a leader. So you've got to make sure that you don't back off your willingness to challenge directly, but instead you move up a little bit on the care personally dimension. You need to make sure that you're telling the person, I can see you really care about this project, and so I want to tell you XYZ or something like that. Don't get dragged too far up don't get dragged into doing all the office housework or baking cupcakes because then you'll be pissed off. At least I will be pissed off when I get dragged into doing that. But take a moment to show that you care. Just a moment. Does that make sense? Is that helpful?
I think it is. And you can let us know too, community, if you have, some follow-ups to that. But I love your points around rewarding the feedback. And it's true, right? We do know women are less likely to get that pointed, very precise feedback. So I like your ideas about being specific. Sometimes the way it lands in your lap is vague and you've got to peel the onion back, right?
Yeah.
I know in my career, I remember raising my hand for a role and I was told, I want you to show up, even more consistently like a leader. I did not bother to peel that onion back, to say like, okay, tell me what you mean in specific.
Yeah, because you knew did you know what they meant?
I thought I did. And I think I was too afraid to challenge. It felt like a form of challenge to say, can you define that?
Yeah. And it's very tricky because sometimes you'll get feedback that is really, it's not feedback, it's bias, it's gender bias. So, and sometimes it's, if you're a Black woman, it's going to be a combination of racial and gender bias. So for example, I was giving a Radical Candor presentation at a company where the CEO is a Black woman I've known for a long time. And she said, Radical Candor is tricky for me because the moment that I seem even slightly annoyed, I get slimed with the angry Black woman stereotype. And so, and I realized that I had known her for the better part of a decade, and I had never seen her even a little bit annoyed. She was always, and I realized that's what a toll that must have taken on her. And I felt kind of ashamed that I hadn't ever noticed it before. So I think being aware of the difference between legitimate feedback about your work and unfair prejudice that you get slimed with is really important as well.
Yeah. That's so helpful because, sometimes you're giving yourself credit when you do that, maybe I am showing up as I should, but it's how others are receiving it or what they're putting on it. I want to ask you a question that comes from Carla from the manager perspective. How can you be that leader that's by the book with rules, but at the same time, somebody people like and want to hang out with?
Yeah. I think the really important thing as a leader is not to focus on being liked, but on caring about others. I think that when we worry too much about how people perceive us and being liked, then we're more likely to fall into what I call manipulative insincerity. We're more likely or ruinous sympathy. So for example, there was this guy that worked on my team. It's the Bob story in the book, Radical Candor. And I wasn't giving him feedback when I should have. And I wasn't giving him the feedback for two reasons. One was ruinous empathy. I really didn't want to hurt his feelings. But if I'm honest with myself, I also wasn't giving him feedback because he was well liked, and I was afraid he would get upset, and maybe he would even start to cry, and then everybody would think I was a big you know what. And so that was the manipulative insincerity part. And because I didn't give him feedback over the course of 10 months, eventually I had to fire him, right? So not so nice after all, just trying to be nice. So I think it's really important. It's really important to focus on caring about your people. So specifically, what are some things you can do? One is readjust your mindset for your one-on-one meetings and really think of those meetings as opportunities to sit down and get to know someone that you're interested in. Another thing I talk a lot about in the book is our career conversations. And when you have these career conversations with people, when you really get to know them and understand what motivates them at work and where they want to go in their career, and you're helping them grow, then you're building a real human relationship. It's not a friendship. I mean, I think the tricky thing about the relationship between an employee and their manager is that it is a real human relationship, but it's not like any other relationship in your life. It's not a friendship. It sometimes feels like a lonely one-way street, like you're doing all the giving, and it is. I mean, that's why you get paid the big bucks,
right.
And so, or maybe not so big bucks, but that's why you get paid. That's why it is a job. So I think you want to make sure that you're taking the time to build those real human relationships. You can take another very small tactic is at the beginning of a staff meeting, for example, save 5 minutes for people to just go around and say what happened over the weekend or what's going on with them. And I think it's especially important in COVID to do that. Like give people the opportunity to explain why they're showing up the way they're showing up. You know, I had a terrible night last night. My kids were up all night throwing up or whatever was going on, so that people get to know each other, and you share your stories as well. So great question. I could go on and on and on, but I want to hear other questions from folks.
Yeah, I have a question for you, Kim, that's been a burning one for me. And it seems like it's this universal truth that if you write a book about feedback, you're going to get huge scoops of feedback yourself. And I wondered, how have you developed a kind of thicker skin over the years for getting feedback yourself?
Yeah, I think one of the things that has helped me is actually not to develop a thick skin, but to be vulnerable to it, to be open to it, and to make sure that I'm treating it like a gift that I'm going to learn something from. Sometimes sometimes it can feel like a shot. It stings a little bit, but it's going to make me healthier. So I think that one of the things I've learned to do is to, first of all, make sure I'm listening with the intent to understand, not to respond. So, for example, my daughter at breakfast the other morning said, "Mom, I wish you weren't the radical candor lady." And immediately this big wave of parental guilt washed over me. I thought, gosh, I'm working too hard. I'm not spending enough time with her. I felt terrible. And then I realized I should make sure I understand. I'm making all these assumptions. So I said, well, who do you wish I were? And she said, I wish you were the lady who minded her own business. So it was very different kind of feedback. I could go spend a little more time working as far as she was concerned. So you want to make sure that you take the time to understand what the person is really saying to you. And then I think part of the reason why we often sort of instinctively reject feedback is that we feel like either it's going to hurt us or something, or that we can't reject the feedback. Like sometimes you're going to get feedback that is wrong. And so one of the things that helps me accept the feedback that I agree with is when I realize that what I can do if I disagree with the feedback. So what can you do when you disagree with the feedback? I think one of the things you can do is look for that 5 or 10% of whatever the person said that you can agree with, and then give voice to that. That demonstrate that you're not shut down to feedback, that you want more feedback in the future. But then say, for the rest of it, I want to think about it and get back to you. And then you must get back to the person, and you've got to explain why you disagree with respectfully. But if you think about it, feedback is an opportunity to have a disagreement. And disagreements, when they're handled respectfully and well, can actually strengthen a relationship. But if you just ignore what someone tells you, that is never going to strengthen your relationship. So I hope those things kind of help you be more open to feedback that is legitimate, but also know how to deal with feedback that is not legitimate. I once had a boss who told me, you know, Kim, I think you're suffering from the competence likability bias. In other words, the more competent I was, the less people, it was in this case, one person in particular, liked me. And I was expecting him, my boss, to like deal with the bias. And instead he said, so try to be more likable. And that was not legitimate feedback. It was his job as the leader to sort of interrupt the bias, not my job to adjust my behavior so that I was acting so that I was less competent. Right.
Right. Well, and I want to dig into something you just said while we stay on feedback before we pivot, which is, you know, you want to train people to give you more feedback in the future, right? That's where so much of the gold is. And so my question is, you know, how do you reward it in the moment? Should you always be saying thank you right away? Is it, you know, how do you train people to come back to you and keep giving you feedback?
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of it is rewarding the feedback. So if we invest our money somewhere, we expect a return on it, right? And if we make a risky investment, we expect a higher return. And so when someone gives you feedback, they are making a risky investment. Only it's not with their money, it's with their emotions, it's with and we need even a higher return on social risks than on financial risks. And so the question is, how can you reward it? If you agree with the feedback, you fix the problem. And then you're kind of theatrical about what you did to fix the problem. You tell the whole team, you know, Jane told me that I did this wrong, and now this is what I'm doing instead. I want all of you to tell me whether I indeed fixed the problem and whether this is better. Did I go too far? Did I go not far enough? When I was at Google, one of our customers gave me this big glass statue. I don't know what, but I was like, what do I do with this thing? and so I declared it the I was wrong, you were right statue. And I would go put it on. So you want a little theater for the rewards is really helpful, because you want to make your listening tangible. You want to make sure that people know that they're not wasting their breath. And if all you do is say, thank you for the feedback, the problem is that people are likely to hear sort of a brush off when you say that. They don't, it's hard to feel like you really mean, they're not getting much of a reward from a thank you. So it needs to be more than a thank you. Now, there are other times when people are not, it's going to take you a while to fix the problem.
Right.
And so then you got to show the steps you're taking to fix the problem. You want to make it tangible. So for example, one person on my team told me that I interrupted him a lot. And I knew this was true. And I also knew it was a deeply ingrained bad habit and that I couldn't change it just because he told me that. So what I did is I got a big rubber band and I said to the whole team, Russ told me that he interrupts me a lot, and I know it's true. So I want whoever's sitting next to me to snap the rubber band if I interrupt anyone. And we had that kind of relationship on that team where people were willing to snap the rubber band. And it was really, it was good. It helped me get better. So that was good. Like, it was good Pavlovian. It hurt. It was good Pavlovian training. But more importantly, it showed the steps I was taking. It made the listening tangible. So that's when it'll take a while. And then the third case we already described. If you disagree with the feedback, often the best way to reward it is to have a respectful explanation of why you disagree. And maybe you move a little bit. Maybe you give the person an opportunity to explain why they're right and you are wrong. Or maybe you help them see things from your perspective.
This is great. So such a good prompt for all of us. If somebody's giving you feedback, a little critique to work on, are you showing them the steps? Are you painting the picture of the ways you're correcting it or shoring up, filling the gap? Give yourself that credit because you're probably doing the work. I want to transition a little bit, Kim, to your exciting new book, and Oscar's asking about it too. How is that new book journey? The book, by the way, is called, for everyone, Just Work, Get Shit Done, Fast and Fair, and it's due out in March.
But you can buy it today on Amazon, and pre-orders help a lot. So feel free to get the book. So the new book journey has been so interesting. I started writing Just Work actually before Harvey Weinstein's story broke. So 3 years ago, back in 2017, and the world keeps changing. And so I feel like there's been so much to read. It's been hard to find the time to write, but it all started when I was doing a Radical Candor workshop, and a man raised his hand and he said, Kim, you and I share a problem. And the problem is, when we walk into a room, people make all these assumptions about us, consciously or unconsciously, based on how we look. And he said, but they're making I'm a tall black man, you're a short white woman. They're making very different assumptions about you and me. And we can't deal with, even though the problem is similar, we can't deal with it in exactly the same way. So I realized this was true. As I said before, Radical Candor works for everybody, but it's much harder for anyone who's not a white man to pull it off than it is for anyone else. So that I call sort of at a high level workplace injustice. And so what Just Work tries to do is it feels like a monolithic, hard, impossible to solve problem. So what I've tried to do is break the problem down into its component parts so that we can respond to discrete incidents when discrete incidents happen. So in my experience, that there are different things that happen. Sometimes we're experiencing bias or unconscious bias, but other times we're experiencing very conscious prejudice. And I think one of the things that has become increasingly clear in the news, but also for me, at least in my personal life, is that a lot of things that I was sort of assuming were unconscious prejudice are not at all unconscious. They're quite conscious prejudices. And you got to deal with that differently. And then other times you're dealing with bullying. So if bias is not meaning it, prejudice is meaning it, and bullying is being mean. These are three very different experiences, and we need to respond differently. So I talk in the book about how we can respond as leaders to make sure that bias, prejudice, and bullying don't hurt our team's ability to collaborate, how we can respond as people harmed by these attitudes and behaviors, how can we respond as upstanders, because I think being the observer, the upstanders have such an important role to play, because if all the burden falls on the targets, bias, prejudice, and bullying, it's not fair. You're doing too much work. And then also, how can we respond as people who cause harm? Because all of us do from time to time express, at the very least, unconscious bias. So how can we respond in a way that makes amends? So those are kind of the root causes of the problem. And then when you add power to the mix, you get discrimination, harassment, and physical violations. And so there again, I talk about the things we can do as leaders, the things we can do as people harmed, the things we can do as upstanders, and the things we can do as people who cause harm. So that's, in a nutshell, just work.
So needed, so needed, never more than right now. I want to ask you, for those companies that are trying to move beyond the statement, the D&I statement about how we're, trying to be more inclusive to actual action.
Yeah.
Is there a first step
Yes.
that they need to take?
Yeah. I mean, it depends on what's going on in your organization, but so let's just take each of the issues in turn. I think in terms of bias, I recommend creating bias interrupters and a norm around bias interrupters in your organization. So what do I mean by that? Get together with your team and decide what are the words we're going to use to interrupt bias when we see it in the meeting. And this is an exception. Usually I say criticize in private, but I think when we see bias, we need to flag it publicly so that we all learn and learn faster. But we need to make sure that when we flag bias, we don't shame people, because then we create defensiveness. So we sort of we create a shared understanding of what bias is. And then we say, we're going to say, I don't think you meant that the way it sounded. One team I worked with just wanted to say, yo, but we're going to say something when we see bias. And not just when it's directed at us, but when we see it directed at someone else. So we're all going to be upstanders in this process. And then if the person who said the bias thing understands why it was biased, the problem, they just apologize and say, I'm really sorry, I get it, let's move on. If they don't understand, which sometimes we don't understand what the problem with what we said, they say, I don't understand. Can we talk about it after the meeting? And then the meeting goes on. So these bias, because I think part of the problem is that we go into these conversations with this fear that these small things are going to explode into big things. And so we don't say anything about them. And that's actually what causes small things to explode into big things, is when we ignore them. They grow and grow and grow until they get out of our control. So that's around bias. I think for prejudice, you really need a code of conduct as a company. So because you can't control as a leader what people believe and don't believe. And you don't want to try. You don't want to become the thought police. But you do want to say to people, you can believe whatever you want to believe, but you cannot impose your beliefs on others. And here's where the line is. And you want to make that line as clear as possible, so that people understand what they can think whatever they want, but what they can and cannot do. And then for bullying, you really want to create consequences for bullying. And you want to create consequences in conversation. You don't want to let the bloviating bullshitters dominate, because then we never get to the truth. You want to create consequences in compensation. You want to make sure that you're not rewarding people who leave a trail of dead bodies, metaphorical, hopefully, in their path. You want to make sure that you're rewarding teamwork as well as results. And you don't want to promote the assholes. I feel like there is a moment in every company's history where the assholes start to win, and that's when the company starts to fail, actually. So you want to make sure that you're not promoting people who behave in a bullying way. Does that make sense?
Yes. Amen. Yes. And I especially love your points around those bias disruptors and giving people kind of a shared language. This is how we interrupt when we hear bias playing out. You're really making it so much easier to act in the moment. You have given us so many great pearls here, Kim. I want to ask you, is there a parting truth bomb? We have a tradition of ending on that. Is there something you really want to tattoo on our minds when it comes to radical candor or just workplaces?
Yes. I think if each of you can think about the way you're going to solicit feedback. Come up with your go-to question. The one that I like to ask is, what could I do or stop doing that would make it easier to work with me? But if that doesn't work for you, think of something else. Krista Quarles, who is the CEO of Open Table, said, the question I like to ask is, tell me why I'm smoking crack. That's fine too. You need to sound like yourself, not like Kim Scott, but figure out the question you're going to use to ask. Make sure it's authentic to you, and then make sure it works for the other person as well. If you are working with someone who's struggling with a drug addiction, you do not want to say, "Tell me why I'm smoking crack," obviously. So think about the way you're going to solicit feedback. Think about the person you most want feedback from, and ask them today, not tomorrow, today. Do it. Just do it. You're going to learn something.
Wow.
And then reward the candor when you get it.
I love it. Thank you so much, Kim. We love your message and the ways you're making work more human, more authentic, and you're helping us navigate these conversations, which can be really sticky. So thank you. Keep going. We love your work. If you all want to learn even more about Radical Candor, you have to check out Kim's course. It's a 6-session virtual course. And get this, it is set to a comedy. So I love that. It starts October 14th, and you'll see links in the show notes for it. You can also pre-order her brand new book, Just Work, Get Shit Done Fast and Fair. So you'll see a link to that as well, all about, like she said, recognizing, attacking, eliminating workplace injustice. I hope you'll also stay in touch with me. Check out my LinkedIn learning courses on upping your confidence, your motivation. Join my newsletter tribe, and I hope you'll follow me here on LinkedIn if you're not already. Everybody, I hope you stay healthy. I hope you stay well and challenge yourself to be radically candid.
And to solicit radical candor, even more importantly.
Yes, and lead on. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Loved being with you.